Hello. Hello, ladies. Look at your man. Now look at me. Now look at your man. Now back to me. Sadly, your man isn't me. But he could learn like me. With the power of distant Taurus.
Hello, and welcome to the Distant Taurus podcast. I am Thomas.
And I'm Robert.
And in this podcast, we look at the 47 prefectures of Japan, and we talk kind of more specifics about them, like a famous place, famous festivals, and of course, food and products that come out of here. For the next couple weeks, we're going to be trying something different and unique. For this week, we're going to be doing a general history of Japan, kind of our favorite period, as well as how the prefectures got separated.
Yeah, it should be fun. I think us switching pace a bit will help us, help you guys get to know us a little better.
Also, next week is Halloween, and we're going to be having a special guest onto the podcast, our friend Saki, who is from Nagano in Japan, and we're going to be talking about what is some Halloween aspects of Japan that people don't really know about. For example, yokai. We're definitely going to be talking about yokai, so if you are interested in any kind of supernatural about Japan, I would recommend giving that a listen next week. So, for this week, we're going to start with general history in Japan. So, Robert, what do you think?
All right. So, well, since we both decided to study our own stuff, I guess, do you want to go for a general overview? Maybe geographical location?
What do you think of Japan?
That's a good way to put it.
What's your personal opinions about about Japan?
Japan's fascinating in the sense of, the history, not just its own traditional history, but even in more modern history, just fascinating to me depending on the choices, but also the culture and how it is both influenced by the West and vastly different from the West. It's at least in this point, it's a very taking some influences, but also still vastly unique from the United States.
Yes. See, for me, I feel my opinion and kind of my interest in Japan is very much older Japan. For example, the period I'm going to be talking about today is Heian Period. And that was pretty much the classical era of Japan.
The Mozart period of Japan?
Kind of. It's whenever you're talking about extreme traditional Japan, you think about Heian Period. Also, they had a lot of modern things that we like that we take for granted that a lot of people didn't have throughout the entire history of the world, but they had it in Heian Period Japan.
So it was kind of like a precursor to a lot of things that we just kind of know today as normal.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So you want to give me a kind of overview on what made the Heian Period so special then?
Well, Heian Period, so it's the thing that we know about Heian Period is very small. So a lot of the things kind of more about modern everyday, the everyday person, we don't know. We only know about the noble elite of the Heian Period.
So the history of those below the nobles wasn't very well recorded then?
Well, yes and no. They could have been recorded. However, because everything was being burnt down, they just were lost. Also, the people that knew how to write were the noble elite. So who are the noble elite going to be writing about? Well, themselves, of course.
Egotism at its finest.
Pretty much. But it's thanks to that egotism. It's thanks to that we have the information that we do about them. It's pretty much, thank God that they were talking about themselves so much. So now we know so much about them, but not anyone else.
Oh, that's unfortunate, but at least we have what we have.
But still, the very first novel ever created came out of Heian Period Japan.
Oh, I think I remember you telling about this. Was this the Tale of Genji?
Yep, the Tales of Genji. So before I really get into that, Heian period, you should know kind of what it was. Heian period was 794 CE to 1185.
Mm-hmm.
So that about 400-year gap right there of like the period.
Mm-hmm.
So during that time, they took some influences from the Tang Dynasty in China.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, "Oh man, that was so cool! Look at how they're doing stuff. Oh my god, yes,
More.
yes, let's do that." And so that's what they did. Meanwhile, in China, they went into kind of more of a warring states period after that.
Mm-hmm.
Japan was still kind of like, "Oh, yes, Tang Dynasty. This is perfect." They were always like a dynasty behind China.
In terms of culturally or technologically.
Kind of both, because during the time, China was the place. China was the place for trade, for technology, everything. Even during the Heian period, they built Heian-kyo, which is modern day Kyoto,
Oh.
based off of the Chinese like town structure. How they have like very specific kind of like a grid, kind of like the palace is here in the center, and then there's certain roads that section off the entire thing that makes it look like a grid.
Yeah.
That they copied that, for example. They also got rice. Before that, they got like rice farming technology from China.
Oh, okay.
So they got a lot of technology from China and a lot of trade kind of with China. That's how they kind of learned about the Tang Dynasty. They were like, oh my God, look at this fine silks and look at all this beautiful art. We want to be like this as well. So they kind of went into Heian period.
So I can definitely see the trend of like China being the big influence for Japan at the time. Was it very much a sense of like, okay, let's do this, but we're gonna do it ourselves differently, kind of like how?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. It was kind of like, sure, this is their thing, but let's make it our own. And so that's what they did. And Heian period, it really interests me about how ahead of the time Heian period Japan was. For example, women's rights were amazing. Women could own land during Heian period Japan. For example, they could also pretty much have sex whenever they wanted to, with whoever they wanted to.
Oh, so it was very liberal in that kind of sense.
Oh yeah, they were very much free to do stuff. And actually, a funny thing is the way to getting married is by staying over someone's house over 3 nights. And you also got to think, these walls in these Japanese houses are literally just paper and maybe some wood. So people know what's going on in the area, and they will leave out a candle in front of the door. This is pretty much how you get married in Heian period Japan. Was if there was 3 candles outside the room, then you are then married with that person.
Oh, okay. So that was kind of like the 3 checkpoints, I guess you could say, and then
3 strikes, you're out, pretty much.
I guess out of the game.
But they were also allowed to get divorced. They were actually able to divorce their husbands. Like, let's say they were doing stuff like that, and then they just kind of lost interest and just not really talked to the girl anymore. They are not restricted to that man, where in the future they will be. But during that time, they could be like, they can actually take it up to like a court and be like, hey, this guy has not even seen me for a month. I want to sever my connection with him. And they will say, okay, cool, that's done.
Wow, that's still very progressive. That's for that time period. That's way ahead of the curve, especially because it seemed like at least the strategy for the longest time was that if you didn't want to be married to somebody anymore, you'd go to the next town over, and you would probably never see them again.
Yeah, it was during that time, the women had just so much rights compared to what would happen afterwards, where they were just all of their rights were taken away from them, and it was horrible. There was actually a special hell in Buddhism made just for women.
Wow.
Yeah, the position of women drastically changed from after Heian Period Japan. But during Heian Period Japan, it was amazing. Even the Tales of Genji was written by a woman. The world's very first novel was written by a woman, Murasaki Shikibu.
Wow. So is this in like a traditional written novel? Like we have like all the original records.
Everything would have had to be written on like a scroll.
Oh, okay.
So, unlike here, like in modern day, you buy a novel, if it's on a bound book that's like, okay, here's chapter 1, here's chapter 2, here's chapter 3. For during the Heian period, for the Tales of Genji, it was written on scrolls, and each scroll would be a chapter. So it would also have illustrations, not only just actual words, but there'd be a picture of it. There's actually a very special technique which has gone off the top of my mind for some reason, but there's a hook nose, slant eyes drawing technique where they make it so that the people in the picture of the novel are very generic. So you can like say, oh, that can be me. So you kind of can be like, oh, that's me in this little like picture, and kind of envision what it is like.
So it kind of facilitated you placing like I forget the phrase, but basically placing yourself in the place of the character in a sort of way, kind of like almost a wish fulfillment sort of style.
Kind of, yeah. So because it's so generic, you can put yourself there.
Oh, that's pretty kind of the author the illustrator to do that for the people.
Yes, but then every scroll that was created was of course created by hand.
Oh, do we have the originals for that still? Or?
I believe there are still some chapters that are the originals, but there are still chapters missing. From what I understand, she did like multiple chapters, and kind of like each chapter would be its own little adventure of Genji.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Was it long, continuous story? Or was it kind of this thing I should probably read for myself, but just so I have an idea. Is it like little self-contained stories, or is this like one long story with little?
It's very long. However, you can read a chapter and be like, okay, you don't have to read a bunch of previous chapters to understand what's happening in a certain chapter.
Okay.
Later on, there are times where he gets promoted, where you kind of be like, okay, I guess now he's promoted. Okay, we just kind of have to keep things in mind. But also in the book, they don't tell you a person's name.
Oh.
There are no names in it except for Genji, who is this playboy type character.
Of course he is.
He gets all the ladies whenever he wants them. This is pretty much each chapter is almost him trying to get laid with a person and succeeding because he's so good looking and amazing at everything he does.
The wish fulfillment vibes is just intensifying so greatly.
So that is Genji. He is an amazing person, playboy that is amazing at everything that he does and incredibly good looking.
What a man.
But there's also actually, surprisingly, there is a chapter in Tales of Genji where for sex scenes in Tales of Genji, there are some, but what they do is they just say, he lied with them.
Well, thankfully it's tasteful.
And, of course, it's just,
Yeah.
You know that there's more to that. But it's
Yeah.
very, and also in China, Japanese language in general, it's more very indirect.
Very appreciated in this case.
Where in one of the chapters, he actually lays with one of his with a guy.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh wow, that's very progressive.
Yes. So there is actual like a chapter in Tales of Genji where he pretty much does have a sexual experiment with a guy.
Interesting.
And this is all in 700 to 1100 CE.
That's the part I can't get my head around, because it's like, well, how is this interpreted? How was this received? How was, like, that's it's way ahead of the curve.
Oh yeah, this is why I love Heian Period Japan, is because like like nowhere in like the pretty much history of the world has anything like that ever happened. You know, you might find stories like that here in the States, but even or in modern time, but even in modern time, it's kind of criticized, and you're kind of like, people don't really like read it as much, I guess. But this is Heian Period Japan. This is like over 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Where this actually came into play, where this actually happened.
That's pretty incredible. I'm curious, and I'm sure a lot of people are probably going to ask this in the comments too, so we might as well talk about it. Was the idea of the samurai a thing during the Heian period?
Yes and no. It was at the very end, the idea of the samurai was being formed. However, what people mostly think about samurai, you know, the guy with the big sword, honor and fighting and stuff like that, that was the last 20 years of samurai culture in general.
So it's very far removed from.
Very. It's so for when they first started off, pretty much they were mercenaries, where you would the police wasn't doing too much, so you would hire a samurai, and this is also like regular everyday people did not hire samurai, because samurai were mercenaries and you required money to pay them.
Okay.
So it was only landowners that were actually hiring samurai. And this comes in after Heian Period Japan. So after Heian Period, it kind of becomes like a warring states period, where this is also where you start seeing how the prefectures were formed, where there's a whole bunch of clans that kind of broke up and said, this is my land, and this is my land. And this is kind of how prefectures kind of first started forming, was landowners saying, all of this is my land, and all of this is my land. And then the main cities being kind of like the clan center, the clan city.
Okay, so I'm guessing at this point, samurai were kind of being the force used to facilitate this kind of separation.
Yeah, exactly. So during that period, samurai were used by landowners to kind of fight for their land. But also, samurai were mostly horseback riders. So they were actually archers before anything else.
Oh, okay.
So, and also, horses in Japan are not the most beautiful horses.
Well, what's so
Short.
weird about them? Oh.
They're extremely short, stumpy, very ugly horses. So if you're thinking about a beautiful white kind of stallion horse galloping down a meadow with like a archer on top, that is very wrong. Imagine a small, stumpy, brown, almost donkey-like horse with a archer on it, running through pretty much dirt and mud. That is a samurai.
Wow, so far removed from the romanticized image.
Oh yeah, but this is not saying that obviously that image didn't exist. But it was very late period. It was very late into the game. For the most part, the like kind of samurai battles were riding your horses around to try to get behind your enemy so you can shoot them in the back with your archery.
So it instead of like the sword techniques that everybody assumes from samurai, it was how good is my archery game, and how can I best effectively use it with my stubby horse?
Exactly. Pretty much, how can I maneuver around my enemy, and how good of a shot you are. Because you got to think, you're still, no matter what, it's still a horse. So you're still moving up and down, and you're still trying to control the horse while firing a bow. Like, that still takes a lot of finesse and technique.
Oh, yeah.
So I would actually argue that this one was a little bit harder. However, still, it wouldn't have looked as glorious as a samurai holding his sword up and having a battle kind of on the battlefield.
I mean, that sounds pretty impressive. I will say the the idea of archery, especially during the Heian period, sounds pretty impressive, especially since at the time, if my limited knowledge of early weaponry is to be understood, archery was very much the top of the line kind of fighting style. Like there was not, at least at the time, a lot of ways to defend against it.
Yes, it wasn't until Oba Nobunaga when he was the first one to implement firearms into a battle. Anytime before that, it was pretty much bow and arrow and occasionally maybe a sword. But that even then, swords were kind of rare to see because they were being made, but they weren't heavily used. Because you got to think, if you are running at a person, with a bow and arrow, and you have a sword,
you're gonna get shot.
Yeah, you're gonna get hit by the arrow first. He's gonna at least get one shot off before you can reach him.
Yeah, so that makes sense.
So that's why that happened. Also, during that time, I guess there was a lot of... That was also... Firearms came in pretty much at the end of the Warring States period, towards the start of the Tokugawa period, I believe. Or no, the shogunate. Start of the shogunate stuff.
All right, fine. I mean, that's a whole...
That was when the samurais were strong enough to literally overtake the emperor, more of the government. Throughout the history of Japan, the emperor has never actually fully ruled Japan until the Meiji Restoration, where they're like, hey, England has a queen and a king.
Yeah.
We want to be more... We want the West to take us seriously. So let's start doing what they want to... doing what they're doing. That's when they started colonizing Korea. That's when they put in their emperor as the full power. And they started doing things kind of like, what was the West doing? Let's give that a shot.
Okay, so this is one of those cases like I was mentioning earlier about the West influencing the East in how they proceeded to do things.
Yes, but throughout Japan, the emperor was just kind of there. During Heian period Japan, the Fujiwara clan actually controlled a lot of politics and kind of everything. It was not the emperor that you wanted to be. You wanted to be the emperor's advisor.
Oh, so that basically you kind of really had control, all things considered.
So the advisor literally ran the entire government. But let's say something went wrong. Let's say there was a riot where they're not happy with what's currently happening in the administration. The advisor would then just blame the emperor because he's technically in power. And then the emperor would either be shipped off, killed, and then replaced.
Brutal, but
And there was this kind of side war with the Fujiwara clan and another clan to try to be the advisor to the emperor. But the Fujiwara clan, for the most part, throughout the Heian period, they were in control.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, even then, even in later times, like during the Warring States period, the emperor was there, but he was just kind of in his own little building, doing his own thing.
Of course it was.
And everyone had an agreement not to touch the emperor.
That was just the unspoken rule kind of thing.
Yeah, it was actually is thoroughly interesting that no one wanted to kill the emperor and say, I am now the emperor, I have killed the previous one. They were like, okay, there's the emperor. How about if I give the emperor, and at some point during the Warring States period, the emperor was so poor that he actually sold off titles. He was pretty much selling titles to survive.
So you basically paid to be given a title and I guess become nobility in this case?
Kind of. It's more of, I want to have the title of this area. I want to be, I don't know the very specific titles, but I want to be this title. You go up to him and he'd be like, okay, how much am I going to get for it? And so in most cases, a lot of the people would just have money and say, I will give you this much money, give me a title. And so he would just write up a title, give him the title, and take the money.
I mean, I guess if it's a very broken system, but
that was, then everything definitely did change later on.
mm-hmm.
So, and even when the shogunate took over,
Mm-hmm.
they still let the emperor kind of be over in the emperor thing, but you knew who was actually in control.
So he was kind of put in a corner while I guess you could say the adults were really working.
Yeah, it was actually, I still find that very interesting, is that anywhere else in the world, they would have killed the emperor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, immediately it would have been like, let's kill the emperor, then I can claim that I am the emperor, I am the proper ruler of this land.
Mm-hmm.
So, for them to just not even touch the emperor throughout the history of Japan
Mm-hmm.
is just amazing, in my opinion. It's kind of, it shows a different side of Japan, pretty much, of they still kind of respected him enough to just leave them there, because there's also a lot of mythology behind the emperor.
Oh.
Yes, the emperor is supposed to be direct descendants of the sun goddess.
Mm-hmm.
And to kill the emperor would be a insult to the sun goddess.
Oh.
And that's actually kind of why Japan is called the land of the rising sun, and why the sun is such a big aspect of Japanese culture. It's because of the sun goddess.
Interesting. It's a weirdly efficient sense of cohesion between the royalty and mythology, if that makes any sense. But no, that's pretty interesting. But did you have anything else you wanted to speak about with the Heian period?
I think. Hold on.
In this case, I'll do a cut and then I'll just lead into it
Yes.
again.
So actually, I'm double checking the name of the person because I forgot.
Yeah.
Sun goddess. Goddess in Japan. Amaterasu. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So the sun goddess was called Amaterasu, and she pretty much was the whole thing of the of mythology. And actually, there's a whole story that I might touch at another time, but there's a bunch of mythology behind Amaterasu. But the emperor is supposed to be a direct descendant of Amaterasu, and so to keep the bloodline going for so long is just stunning, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty impressive. I mean, any last remarks you want to give on the Heian period, or?
Let me see. The only thing that I would have to say was, fashion.
Oh.
Fashion was everything. So there were different kind of levels of nobility in the court, and pretty much being birth determined everything.
Oh, okay.
During that period as well.
Yeah.
So if you're a part of a certain level of nobility, you can wear certain fabrics and certain silks and certain patterns and certain colors. Pretty much, it was a very much, what is she wearing today? Oh, she was wearing red today. No. Or her fan had 6 instead of 7 partings. Oh my God. Like, pretty much the smallest detail of what you're wearing could ruin you.
Highly specific. Was it just one of the things you had to figure out on the fly, or was it just like an?
Oh no, there was things where it was like, here is this kind of like, this is what you can wear.
So there's like a code.
Yes. The higher up you are, I believe purple was the number 1 color. But I'm not entirely sure. But pretty much depending on your level, that was your color.
Yeah.
And the closest to the emperor, pretty much that's when things were kind of more detailed, and you want to make sure. Also, kimonos were very heavy. So actually, another part of Heian period was almost like a kind of they seem to always be kind of depressed.
Was there a specific reason for this depression?
They they constantly had to walk around with pretty much 40 pounds of clothes on them. And this is why if you look up pictures of drawings during the Heian period, a lot of the time they're kind of laying down or they're not doing too much because they have 50 pounds of silk on them. And it's kind of like you can't do too much.
So really, they're basically being held down by the weight of the clothes, and I guess you could say slouching almost.
Yes, so they had multiple layers as well of cloth because if you're wearing silk, you don't want to get any kind of sweat or anything onto the silk.
Fair enough.
Otherwise, it'll ruin it.
Yeah.
And you don't want to ruin it, obviously.
You spend a lot of money on it.
Yeah, so you have, I think they had like 3 layers at least underneath the actual kimono.
Oh.
So there is the actual layer that's on your skin, and then a couple more to kind of, if you keep sweating, then that hopefully that will catch it. And then there's the actual kimono itself.
That's pretty interesting. So they had kind of like almost a sweatsuit under their full kimono that they displayed for the people to see.
Yeah, it was very much, and actually, this is another reason why sometimes the sexuality was kind of like very free, was that you're looking at someone that you're only looking at their face. Other than that, you're looking at like 50 pounds of cloth. So you can't really tell. Sometimes you can't tell if they're a guy or a girl, because also the fashion during that time was to paint your face white, and then draw in eyebrows, and then paint your teeth black.
Oh, black teeth?
Oh yes.
Why black?
From what I understood, that was just kind of a show of nobility. That's kind of what they did in the Tang Dynasty, I believe, and that's what they did there. If you had white teeth, that was actually seen as you were poor and horrible and very kind of untouchable.
That's kind of hilarious.
So you wanted to have black teeth during that time.
Oh, okay.
Which, yeah, at current times that would be horrible, but
I'd be horrified if I had black teeth because I'd think, oh no, I skipped out on brushing for like the 5th time today.
Yes. So, but yeah, they actually painted it black, and that was the fashion.
I mean, hey, every period's got its own fashion sense.
Yes. So speaking about that, what about your period?
All right, so I guess switching gears and going to the complete opposite end of the timeline, I wanted to talk about post-World War II Japan, and more specifically, the insane economic rise that it experienced from about about 45 to, I believe, 1991. It's even today still, I believe, the 3rd largest economy. Don't quote me on that. I did not check that specifically right now, but last time I had read about it, that was about where it was. But anyway, so yeah, post World War II, Japan was pretty much devastated by the war, and so, well, after that, and the United States decided to come in and help them. One, to help stop prevent World War III. Nobody wanted to repeat the events that led to World War II. So like, well, if we help them upturn so that they're not basically ruined economically for the next 30 years, we won't have the rise of the next dictator who wants to overthrow the world.
Also, as a side note, they spared the emperor during that time too.
Oh,
the emperor knew a lot of kind of war crimes that were happening during that time, but the United States chose not to kill the emperor, and they chose to just let him be.
I did not know that one. But there was another reason why the United States helped Japan, and that was because of a little thing that they feared called communism. Yes. So basically, to curtail the possibility of that becoming a thing, the United States basically helped the Japan rise up. So before World War II, one of their biggest industries was cotton, and that was, along with everything, completely destroyed. So what they eventually began doing was manufacturing stuff. More specifically industry, just basically in building things. they got a start, but the thing that triggered it, that caused them to have the big uprise that everybody kind of, knows about in the history books, was the Korean War.
Disco. Oh, sorry.
We'll get to disco. We'll get to disco. It happens eventually. But no, it was the Korean War. So yeah, they produced a lot of the goods used, or a lot of different materials and weapons and tools used during that war, and that was kind of the springboard. They were on the map, and they were doing the growth period. And so from about the 50s to the 70s, they were just on the rise. Manufacturing, it was cheap, it was efficient, it was, at least in this case, reliable. But almost in a similar way to how China rose to become a big manufacturing powerhouse now, that's what Japan was doing. And that was continuing up until the 70s. And about the 70s is when I think the real technological boom that everybody kind of assumes, or knows Japan for, where you started getting more computer goods, more different types of technologies coming in, because the manufacturing was kind of like on a bit of a decrease, so they pivoted towards technology. And so that's when you start seeing brands like Sony, you start seeing stuff like Nintendo coming into the game. You start seeing a lot more of the typical technologies that or companies that people kind of know about Japan for. So that started happening, and then that all came to a vast period of growth in the 80s, which was the economic bubble that began forming. And that's when disco finally started. Basically, a large portion of the 80s, I believe specifically 86, was just basically party central, because people were making money, or at least making money in quotes, like there was no tomorrow. A lot of money was being thrown around.
Sounds like my type of time.
Oh no, it was a good time. I believe at one point the what is it? I believe the Emperor's Palace, or the grounds around it specifically as well, I think was worth more than the entire property value of California at that point.
Wow.
Yeah, no, they were making the money and then swinging that money around. They were slowly buying up properties like all over the world, including even Rockefeller Center. I didn't even know that had been purchased by a Japanese company at a certain point. But yeah, they were throwing around the money. But the thing was, it was all built on loans. And so as people took out the loans, they bought property, developed it, showed it like, here, I did this, so can I have another loan? And then they did that, kept increasing their assets. And then eventually it did catch up to them in 91. And that's kind of when the party stopped in the traditional sense. You could say the economy stabilized, but a lot of the things that kind of kept appearing from that period still remain relevant. You still see, a lot of Japanese cars, even in America. You see, even right now, like video games are becoming the big thing. Most of them are from Japan. Manga and anime became, popular. The thing was that as the cultural, or excuse me, the technological game was kind of decreasing, it seems that recently the big shift has been like the cultural game. Like even the fact that we're having this conversation right now could be argued to be a result of the recent shift from technologies to culture, because anime and like Japan styles, like even the idea of samurai, are just kind of like blooming everywhere. It was even a part of the aesthetic of cyberpunk in the West. Like,
oh yeah, I think a lot of people, especially nowadays, are getting interested in Japan based off of like anime, manga, and kind of maybe even just kind of samurais.
mm-hmm. Those are definitely the ones that everybody knows for. I mean, in our case, like we're really looking past it, but the anime and the manga is like the gateway, almost the gateway drug in a funny sort of sense. But a lot of that had to do with just the insane rise of the Japanese economy. At one point, everybody was anticipating Japan to overtake America as the superpower, which was, funny enough, the reason for the economic bubble, because the U.S. was like, well, our industries need to flourish too, so they set up a deal.
Hey guys, me too.
Yeah, and I believe, if I remember the exact terms correctly, it depreciated the dollar to the yen, which in turn they lessened the loans, and that's what started the bubble with the whole loan game rising. But that's when Party Central really just was the thing. It was kind of like you were talking about with the Heian period. It was a lot of extravagance. It was a lot about having the suits, going to the fancy places to get meals, luxury. I remember hearing or reading in a article like on an off branch. It was like in one neighborhood, if you saw a $10,000 bill on the ground, it'd be like, oh well, it's just normal. Like that money was being
Wow.
thrown around like that. So, or excuse me, 10,000 yen bill. But yeah, it was a crazy time. It was. I can't think of anything specifically that matches that speed of rise in economy from like totally destroyed to, top three. So it's a fascinating time. It's like the seeds that were sown that created a lot of, the modern cultural game that we have now, the podcast we have today, I guess you could say in a sense. But it's definitely fascinating to me from both an economical and sort of even in a cultural sense, because you can see the ways in which Japan almost came to influence most other countries in a sort of way. And I guess a case you could say a reverse influence of the East influencing the West.
That is true. Yes.
But yeah, that's a large portion of what I wanted to cover for today. I mean, we could go into specifics about anime and manga, but I feel like in this case, it doesn't really properly exemplify the growth.
Also, for prefectures, they actually were created at the beginning of the Meiji period.
Oh.
So there was all of the separate kind of clan areas. But what the shogunate did was they literally measured all of the land in Japan. They actually went through and said, okay, we're going to start measuring Japanese land in koku. And based off of that, they actually had a whole like kind of reward system where they were actually rewarding some samurai with koku, like land. And this is actually when kind of pretty much they mapped out all of Japan. How much land do we actually have? And then that's when they actually, at the beginning of the Meiji period, they made actual prefectures and named those prefectures. But for the most part, before they became official prefectures during the Meiji period, they were pretty much clan areas and like landowner areas.
Okay.
And that's also why if you look at a prefecture, they will actually have a very specific flag for each prefecture. And that is because of the clan. Each flag would pretty much be the previous clan's flag.
Are those carried over to today, or is that...
I believe they are. I don't know how popular the flags are in modern times, but when you look up prefectures, there'll usually maybe be a flag by them. And that'll be in the same essence of a state flag here in the United States.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Where it's there, but the most recognizable flag to everyone would be the United States flag.
Right, from an outsider's perspective, yeah.
Yes. But even then, for us, I don't know Florida's state flag. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know all 50 flags. I only know my state's flag.
You never learned cartography? I don't actually know if that's the actual study in this case, but
That's
that's neither here nor there.
I have no idea. But Japan, yeah.
Little tangent.
Yes. So yeah, I think that is it for this week. So everyone, thank you for listening. Next week we're gonna have our guest Saki, who's gonna be for our Halloween special. That is gonna be both in English and Japanese, where we're asking her questions in both, of course. So until then, thank you guys for listening.
See ya.